37 people have been killed and 60 wounded in an attack on a Canadian mining company convoy in eastern Burkina Faso. The convoy was ambushed 40 kilometers from the company's Bongo mine. The company Semafo says the military convoy escort vehicle was struck by an explosive device before gunmen opened fire. The gold mining business beefed up security last year when two of its mines in the country came under attack. The West African state has been racked by an insurgency that has killed hundreds of people in recent years. At the same time, the military has struggled to contain violence spilling over the border from neighboring Mali. For more on this, we are joined by our correspondent Phil Ilhaza from Abuja. Thank you, Phil, for joining us. Why are we seeing more attacks by militants in West African countries?
Well, thank you. What we know is that from the recent years, in the recent decade, we've seen Islamic State militants try to gain access and control over some African countries. For example, in Nigeria, where in 2015, the Islamic State actually formed a faction of a decade-long insurgency group known as Boko Haram. They formed a faction of Boko Haram now known as ISWAP, Islamic State of West Africa Province. And since 2015, we've seen more sophisticated attacks focused on military formations, high-profile kidnapping of high-profile civilians being kidnapped, and all that. So it's more like a conscious effort by these insurgent groups to try to control, swaths of territories in Africa. And also, it's not far-fetched from the fact that there's been, some form of control or seriousness in tackling insurgency in other parts of the world, apart from the Sahel and this part of Africa. So it's more like while the terrorist organizations and the attacks are being, killed in those parts of the world, in the Middle East, we are now beginning to see countries in Africa bear the brunt of the fact that porous borders, loopholes in insecurity infrastructure, and ideology challenges in this part of the world. It now seems like the insurgents are feasting on these to try to control more swaths of territory in Africa.
Some militant groups were allies of ISIS. Will the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi have an impact on the groups operating in this area?
Well, it's unclear how exactly the death of the militant leader al-Baghdadi will take its toll on the structure. But speaking to some security experts, and they have suggested or said that taking out the leader, yes, it might have a temporal effect on the group. But we know that just recently that position has been replaced by someone else. Not much is known so far about the new leader. But we know that the Islamic State militants now have a new leader. What we also know is that experts are saying rather than just take out or focus on the leader, also try to attempt to break down their strong structures, break down their rank and files in not just their headquarters, maybe in Syria and Libya and the likes, but in other African countries where they have not yet gained full grounds, or control of swaths of territories. And maybe that's the reason why African leaders will now need to come together to coordinate their approach in tackling insurgency in this part of the world.
Yesterday, 37 people were killed in an ambush on a convoy transporting employees of a Canadian mining company in Burkina Faso. Is there any possibility of any joint military coordination among Western African nations against the militant outfits?
Well, we know that there's been a G5 Sahel force that has been in existence for almost a decade now. They're backed up strongly by French forces, and they've helped, for example, countries like Mali regain an entire northern hemisphere that was in 2012 taken over by these same insurgents. But we've seen in recent times more attacks, series of attacks in Mali, in Nigeria, in Niger, in Chad, and a couple of these countries in the Sahel region. And just like the president of Mali said, that now more than ever, more assistance, involvement of Western world will now be needed to be able to tackle this insurgency. We also know that ECOWAS, which is a combination of countries in the West African region, have met recently, and they've condemned the attacks, and they've also gone ahead to pledge about $1 billion to tackle the insecurity challenges, especially as it regards to insurgency. We also know that the French defense minister says there will be some form of reinforcement of special forces from not just France but European countries this time to try to help Malian army to tackle the insurgency there, and that is something that we believe that the ECOWAS and other African leaders will try to see how they can gain assistance from other Western countries in order to tackle what is going on. But so far we are not clear about what force is tackling insurgency when it comes to the Sahel region, apart from the G5 forces, multinational joint task force with some of these West African countries. These are the ones that are tackling it so far as we speak.
Thank you, Phil. We were talking to our correspondent from Abuja, Phil Ilhaza.